LaTosha, welcome back. How are you, my friend?
I'm fine. How are you doing?
Fine. So how is the election going in Georgia? What can you tell us on the ground there in terms of what's going on, the enthusiasm, the excitement?
Well, all I will say is I told you so. That I have been saying consistently that even though this was a arduous process, that it has been a long campaign, that people are very resolute in Georgia. And so the energy is so interesting. Today, when we went out canvassing, I found myself, normally I'm going out to kind of encourage people to vote. I didn't even get a chance to say it. I was going to certain communities and people were like coming up, showing us their stickers, like just like scores of people, like I voted already. I want my t-shirt, or, coming up and telling us like they voted and they were getting their friends to vote. And so it's something different that is happening. I think, what we saw is I think the Republicans went too far. I think they made some critical mistakes. I think having Herschel Walker as a candidate, I think there are some members of the Black community that are quite frankly offended by it, that I think it actually worked. It worked against them, that they felt that, here the Republican Party went and picked an athlete, a candidate out of Texas, plucked him, brought him to Georgia. And because he was an athlete, then some way that was supposed to make communities of color or Black folks say, oh yeah, this was a Heisman Trophy winner. This was a football star, so we're going to follow him. And people feel very insulted by his candidacy. One, in terms of, and even quite frankly, even embarrassed by the way that he has performed, and embarrassed by the way that he shows up, but also the way that the Republicans, many people that I've talked to in their mind, how they've exploited him. And so I think when you look at the candidacies of Warnock and Walker, that it's not comparing apples to apples. And so what it has done is it actually triggered Black voters, I think, in the state.
That's remarkable. And also, share if you could, what's the reaction? Republicans wanted to ban early voting on Saturday. They didn't want you to have early voting. And Democrats, Senator Warnock, went to court, and the court sided with the Democrats and said, voting is good. Why do Republicans want to make it harder to vote? And what's the reaction to the communities you're working with to the Republicans' efforts to literally prevent them from casting a ballot?
I think the Republicans, quite frankly, didn't want to vote. And I want people to really understand how egregious it was. The Secretary of State, which is the constitutional officer, that their sole purpose is to make sure that we have a strong democracy by managing the electoral process. Part of the job of a Secretary of State is to actually oversee the process of voter registration and voter education, and to build and engage citizenry. So here it is, the Secretary of State of Georgia were suing to not have an election day, an early voting election day. How preponderous is that, right? And so I think we know what it is, that at the end of the day, why would you not want an election day other than you don't want some people to have access, particularly on Saturday, on Saturday and the weekends, when we know that some folks, work jobs, have all kinds of different barriers that makes it very difficult for them to get to the polls during work hours, or even from 7 to 7, depending on where you live. And so what they recognize is that having this early voting, having voting access on the weekend, would actually expand the opportunity to members of the community of Georgia residents that it may be difficult. And so what they have shown themselves with the voter suppression and their actions so far is they are doing everything within their power to create these barriers because they want to suppress the vote. That is very intentional. And so that's why you see Republican leadership and the Secretary of State, for God's sake, actually sue to make sure to not have an election day, which quite frankly was which you had a record number turnout, all weekend, which meant that not only was it something that was needed, but it was something that really there was a high demand for it. And so how could they be that off? It wasn't that they were off. They have been very intentional about seeking to suppress the vote, and particularly for low wealth communities of color, and people who may have barriers of really being able to vote during the traditional voting hours.
We had talked in the past when Republicans were passing the new laws in your state to suppress the vote. And still Democrats, not all, obviously Stacey Abrams didn't win, but Reverend Warnock had won, Senator Warnock, but there was the 50% runoff that he has to do now. What were the real world obstacles that you saw based on what Republicans had enacted, and did it have an impact on the final results either way?
Absolutely. Let me say this, that at the end of the day, just because there's high voter turnout does not mean that voter suppression did not have an impact, nor does it mean that the voter suppression law that was put in place actually hurt our community. We have had to expend a tremendous amount of man-woman hours. We've had to spend a tremendous amount of resources in this election. We've had to organize and do a lot of voter education. There are a number of things that happen. So one of the things that SB 202 did is it actually made the period to vote shorter. That where there used to be 8 or 9 weeks for early voting, now that was condensed to 4 weeks. So less than 4 weeks for people to be able to vote. That also prevented the opportunity to actually register people. So voters who may come of age to be able to register to vote from the last election, this election, while they may have had an opportunity last time where we were able to register people to vote, there was no registration. By the time the election happened, it was too late to register new voters to be able to participate in this election cycle. Another thing that we know is that there was a severe drop off in mail-in ballot voting, that there were 1.2 million people who participated in mail-in voting in the last election. This time in the midterm elections, it was 0.2 million. So 1 million people off the bat, right, who use that as access did not use it this time. You know, when you're looking at drop boxes, it's almost, I haven't seen a drop box yet, and I've actually been riding around. It's extremely difficult. So all of those things is like death by 1,000 cuts. It's had a compounded impact on voters' ability to be able to get equal and fair access to the ballot. It's had a compounded impact in terms of even the time and the access points to it. And then on top of that, we're seeing these efforts where instead of the Secretary of State wanting to make the process accessible, we have a Secretary of State and a Republican leadership that are actually trying to prevent people from having access to the ballot.
I'm chatting with LaTosha Brown, the co-founder of Black Voters Matter. What I saw from the data today from ABC News, that as of Sunday, the first 2 days of early voting, that Black voters are voting outpacing the demographics of the group, like you're outpacing your percentage of the state. Is there a sense, could you share Black voters, when they get a sense that these Republicans don't want them to vote, want to disenfranchise them, that they actually go out even harder and go, no, you're not going to take away my vote. People have suffered too much and sacrificed too much to allow this to happen now.
Yeah, I think there's a number of things. I think there are 3 really core things that are driving the Black vote. One, I think that people are really seriously insulted. I think that they are insulted.
Interesting.
Around this candidacy, that having Herschel Walker and propping him up to take a Black man and prop him up for a white racist agenda. People are not fooled by that. Those of us still in the South, we know that that's an old dog with not any new tricks. We've seen that before, and that, quite frankly, many people feel that's insulting, right? Not only insulted because of who he is, but insulting based on the needs. We have severe needs in our state. And so I think that that's one thing. The second thing is, I think the voter suppression, that what happened, we said this, that it wasn't going to be, while it's made it difficult and people recognize some of the changes, and that while we are overcoming it, it doesn't mean that people are frustrated because they've got to deal with this. They've got to jump over these barriers. And in some ways, I think that it has triggered people, that their anger has turned into activism, that they've been activated because they're upset with that. And I think the third thing is that in this moment right now, what we're seeing is the Republican Party align itself with white supremacists and nationalists and anti-Semitic folks, and literally coddle those who are anti-democratic and go against, like, literally be able to weaponize race. And people are really frustrated with that. And so I think that there's also a backlash. You're saying, no, we're not going back, we're going to go forward. And I think all of that is in the context of, in the state of Georgia, what we've seen in the last 4 years, we've seen over 7 hospitals close. Like, we've got 1.5 million people who are uninsured right now, and they don't have to be. It has been the Republican leadership that has prevented the expansion of Medicaid, which our state loses access to $21 billion in health funds. People recognize that. We're in a state that the price of gas has gone up, right? Oh, and minimum wage has not. The minimum wage in the state of Georgia currently is $5.15 an hour. People understand that. And so I think that there's also this idea that the voters that I'm talking to is saying, this is not a game. Our lives are not really a game. They really do want leadership of someone who is going to change policy to change the conditions in their lives. And that is a factor as well.
And those are all great motivating factors for people to come out. It's real world impact on their lives. You know, we're now seeing headlines here in the press and the political press about Herschel Walker living in Texas. And he's even got a rebate. You had to have a primary residence of Texas. And apparently he only put his wife's house as his address. And it doesn't look like he was living there or not. Is that getting much play in the Georgia, in the local media? This question of, did Herschel Walker lie about where he lived and it's all a game?
It is getting, I think that is absolutely getting some traction. My understanding, as I'm talking to people, I think that is actually really impacting him, particularly with independent voters. I think that there's nothing, we don't need to see anything else from Herschel Walker. He has shown us who we are and he's shown us who he is, and we believe him. We believe that he is not capable of serving. We believe that he will lie. We believe that he will not operate in an integrity. And we believe that he is way over his head, that he is incapable of being able to have this position. And so I think what that only does is reinforce people's idea of belief about his inability to be able to operate in integrity and serve. But I also think that it's really hurting him with independent voters. And so, and I've actually talked to some that just said, this is just, it's like a never ending, it's like never ending chaos. There's no depth, to how far, how low he will go. And then I think that if you know anything about Southern politics and you know anything about Georgia, where people are very homogeneous, that folks want folks from Georgia to actually represent Georgia. We don't like folks outside of Georgia telling us what to do, right? We may work and they can come and support us, but we want to see homegrown leadership. That's very important for people in the South. And so I think that that's another element as well that is very clear, that he was someone that was plucked out of Texas to run specifically for this seat. And while he has a history of Georgia, we don't consider him, he's not a current resident. And I think his tax papers actually show that, of someone who lives or even cares about the state of Georgia.
Yeah, he was getting a tax rebate in Texas that you can only get if you say your house is your primary residence. And that was through 2021. So look, whoever it was, Trump or whoever, said, come run and we'll get you the money to win. So there's something else. A lot of people in the political media on cable news will talk about Democrats need to win this. Having 51 seats is more important, is really important over 50 seats in the Senate. And I get that. But you're in Georgia. You've seen Reverend Warnock before he was a senator. I'd love you to share for people who don't know much about the senator other than seeing clips about him as a person and his service to the community and his compassion and his intelligence and thoughtfulness. What can you share for people?
Let me say that Senator Warnock is a brilliant man who has actually stood with community. He has been a staunch advocate for voting rights. If there's any moment in time that we need someone to be on the Hill to fight for the restoration of the Voting Rights Act and to protect democracy in this country, we need leadership on all levels. And so he has actually have a track record that it didn't start when he became a senator, but that he has actually been a staunch advocate for voting rights and the expansion of voting rights. He's also been a staunch advocate for making sure that we're looking out for low wealth and the working class folks and poor folks in our community and through all communities. I think that he's shown himself to be a bridge builder, where he's able to actually address the needs of all folks of Georgia. One of the things that I think that he did, even in serving as senator, is that one of the things that he did was actually he put forth an amendment for the health, an amendment that in these states that refuse to expand Medicaid, he is proposing an amendment that folks will not, a loophole that people in those states that desperately need Medicaid would actually have access to it. He's also been a staunch supporter around insulin, that literally holding companies accountable to something that particularly what we see in communities of color and poor and low wealth communities actually have. Insulin, for some folks that might not be a big deal, but when we're seeing something, a medicine that literally is not just about your quality of life, but will keep you alive, that is severely overpriced, we need that kind of leadership. And so I think that the other thing that I think that is really interesting about him, this is a man that has been very open about growing up in humble means, right? But has never lost touch with the community. His church he's actually the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, which is the former church of Dr. Martin Luther King, which is actually rooted and centered in the community. That his churches in the community is also been a place that's been a nucleus in that community of serving the surrounding areas. So I think at the end of the day, what we want is we want someone that not only talks the talk, but walks the walk. And what his life has shown us is that he has been committed to justice. He has shown us that he has also been committed to literally looking out and making sure that we're pulling all boats up, right? For poor and low wealth people. I think he also has shown that he is a bridge builder, that he's actually willing to work across the aisle, that he's literally being able to touch with folks, no matter what community, that literally he sees himself as a senator to represent all Georgians. Isn't that the kind of leadership we need right now? Someone with integrity, someone who has a heart for the people, someone who will move in a way that will actually advocate for our interests. We desperately need that in this country, not just the state of Georgia, but America really needs that in this moment.
And it's true, a senator represents a state, but they make federal national legislation. And who do people want? Herschel Walker contributing to that or whatever he'll do, or Senator Warnock. Two last things, and it's apart from the race. Look, around the election, people get excited. They get involved, they vote, they make phone calls, stuff, and then people just sometimes disappear. Sometimes they feel like they're not being reached out to, but a lot of times people just check out. What do you do to keep people engaged? And I ask this also from a selfish point of view, just even on my radio show, to keep people engaged, understand the stakes are still high, even though we don't have the heat of an election around. So what can you share by just keeping people engaged in this process, in this fight?
I'm so glad you asked that question. That's really the motto of Black Voters Matter. Black Voters Matter wanted to break this cycle. And I think we have actually brought a new model. That one of the frustrations in the African-American community is that the only time that we would actually see many organizations to work around voter registration or talking about voter empowerment would be around elections. That's the only time I would call it the round the Negroes up. We're going to go 3 weeks before the election, we round folk up, you go to vote. Organizations like ours, we've been very clear that our work is 365 days out of the year. So yes, we've got this election on December 6th. Guess what? On December the 7th, well, maybe the 7th, we might take a little break, but on December the 8th, we are back at it. At the end of the day, I think what we've shown in our work, and I think this is what is needed, that we have to recognize that to actually have a robust democracy, it's not just about participation. It really is around how people feel a sense of power. And that we also recognize that there are ebbs and flows, in movement. So yes, there's sometimes that the energy is going to be real, real high. There's sometimes that it's not going to be as high, but what you need is a consistent current. It's like the ocean. So sometimes the ocean has big, huge waves. Sometimes the ocean seems still, but what I can guarantee you is there's always a current happening in the ocean. And so as an organizer, our job is to actually make sure that there is a constant current, that there's always entry points to be able to engage people. And the way that we do that is year round. We're not just engaged around elections. We're engaged in the process, the legislative process around educating people what's happening. We're working with groups that are doing work, grassroots groups year round that are doing work around, whether it's policy, whether it's empowerment, whether it's around community work. That part of what we have to see is we have to see that it is important for us to build out an ecosystem, that democracy is not something that, okay, we won, that America is like this idea that we got this magical thing called democracy that was won in some war in the 16th century, and that it's going to be perpetual in the United States. That fundamentally what creates a democracy is when you've got a robust, engaged citizenry. And so that's what we do. The work that we do is that we don't center candidates, we don't center political parties. While on our C4 side, yes, we may support some candidates, and we've actually supported some party platforms, but at the end of the day, it is really around centering people, because that's what we think that is going to build a sustained democracy. So it's not about the transaction of voting, it's around the transformational process of changing America to be the America we desire and we deserve. And that goes beyond voting. That is voting, that is advocacy, that's getting legislation, that's making sure that we get resources in our community, that makes sure that we're educating people about what their rights are. And so we do all of those things year round, because that's how we build power. It's not about participation. This is about power.
And that's such a great playbook for people, the idea of staying as engaged as you can be. I know around the elections, if people are busy, they still make a little time. Then sometimes they're too busy for other things, but by keep doing events, if it's lobbying on legislation, getting people engaged in the off-year elections, it can be fun things. There's nothing wrong with having fun
It is
things.
fun things. So Dean, one of
Right.
the things we're doing now, like even tonight as we speak, I don't know if you're a fan. I'm a big Marvel fan, right? And so I love Black Panther. And so Black Panther 2 is out, Wakanda Forever's. And so what we've done is we know that people are tired, and we also have to take this moment to actually, it's not just about fighting, it's also about creating joy. And so tonight we have a movie showing where we've actually bought out 10 theaters throughout the state of Georgia. And for our volunteers, we'll work with people who volunteer and work to actually help get the vote out. What we're doing is we're celebrating. Tonight we've got a sold out theater in Macon, Georgia, where people are watching the Black Panther walk. We call it Wakanda Votes Forever night, where we're actually talking about, we're doing a texting party before the movie starts in the theater, where everybody's sitting in the theater, all 200 people are texting 100 people to make sure that they know about the vote. And then we're watching the film, we're providing concessions, we're celebrating, and it's such a beautiful experience. In this work, we also have to find ways to create joy, creativity, and innovation. And that's what we're doing. We're doing it all this week. We've got Wakanda Votes Forever showings all throughout this week.
That is great. And it really is. There's nothing wrong with having some fun in all of this.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to try to come up with fun things for the radio show in the new year. I'm not sure what. So last thing, it's Giving Tuesday. People know it's a day to donate. If people want to donate to Black Voters Matter, where can they go to? How can they do that?
You can donate. Thank you so much. It is Giving Tuesday. Please, your donation makes a difference. It helps us stay in these streets and do our work. If you can go to blackvotersmatterfund.org, and the donate page should come right up. So Black Voters Matter Fund, and donate to our organization. We're actually, part of our model is not just the work that we're doing. Part of what we believe is building out the ecosystem and the infrastructure of grassroots groups. Just in this election alone, we've actually raised and literally invested $2 million directly to grassroots groups on the ground to take care of vans and make sure that they're doing voting outreach and their literature is printed. Over the last 5 years, we've actually raised and distributed, meaning that we've actually invested and given checks to over 1,000 Black-led organizations in 13 states. We've actually given away $29 million because of the support of people like you that are listening and sending us $50 and $25. Your money, you can see the work. We want you to see the work. That's why we follow us. You can see the work. See the work in the streets, you can see the results. And so when you invest in us, you invest in communities, because we take a part of your investment, the majority of your investment, that goes right back to the ground, because we believe that in order to actually make change, we're going to have to empower those on the ground, on the front lines, to have what they need to be able to do this work.
That's great stuff. And you told us before the election, you came on and you gave a great pep talk, and you were right that we won some of the key races there. And the big vote, you can vote now in Georgia. You don't have to wait till December 6th. December 6th is the last day you can vote. So LaTosha, I wish you the best, and everyone at Black Voters Matter, and have some fun with the movie. I look forward to chatting with you in the future.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you. I always enjoy being on. All right, let's vote, y'all. We can do this.
We can do it.